Therapy Radio, you've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. If you're watching this on YouTube, obviously, I am recording this on video. So if you're listening to the radio broadcast of this episode, or you're just listening to the audio-only podcast of this episode, go to Geek Therapy Radio Podcast on YouTube so you can watch me talk about what I'm going to talk about. I had this kind of, this realization a few months ago it really, there's no harm in uploading these as YouTube videos because people don't have to click on them. People don't have to watch them. It's just extra content. And if there's something there that people find valuable or entertaining, then it can't hurt just to upload the thing. Even if the thing gets 100 downvotes, which you can't see on YouTube anymore, that's a whole nother can of worms. Even if people don't like it, there's no harm in just kind of putting it out there. Because what I found is that usually if you have something that you're passionate about and people can tell that you're passionate about something, if they can tell you're interested in something, if they can tell you have a lot of passion in your words for whatever it is you're talking about, whatever your form is, whatever your craft is, whatever your art is, whatever you're trying to present, and not everybody's going to like what you present, and that's perfectly fine, but some people will. So that's why I started to upload these broadcasts a little bit more often, even if it's not some sort of fancy video that I spend days and days and days and hundreds of hours into editing. It's just good content. It's just nice content to have out there for anybody who might be interested. In the last show I uploaded, I got a few more subs from the video on YouTube. So I was like, you know what? It can't hurt to upload this. So that's good segues to the plug. Of course, like I'm saying, you can find Geek Therapy Radio Podcast also on YouTube. Just go to YouTube and type in Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. Look for the red, white, and black color scheme, and that's how you know you've got me. The same across all other forms of media and social media. Go onto Twitter, type in Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, red, white, and black color scheme. That's how you know you're me. Same thing on Facebook, Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, TikTok, Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, all the platforms, all the YouTubes and podcasts too. So your favorite podcast app, the iHeartRadio app, of course, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Apple Podcast, Spotify, however you listen to podcasts. Type in Geek Therapy Radio Podcast, and that's how you find me in podcast form and across all social media. All right, so I know that the past few weeks, it seems on the show, I have been on this tangent. I've gone onto the tangent a lot regarding EVs. It keeps coming up. Obviously, if you're listening to this station, you know that my show kind of stands out from the rest in that I don't toe the line of what I like to call MSTR, mainstream talk radio. You hear this term bandied about a lot on talk radio, mostly on talk radio and on, Fox News and things, which I'm not, this is not a knock, this is not a judgment, but you hear the term mainstream media. And it's always funny to me hearing somebody like Sean Hannity or whatever talking about the mainstream media when he has hundreds of millions, not hundreds of millions, but tens of millions of listeners, tens of millions of viewers. Other shows too, you'll hear these high profile, talk radio hosts here in Houston and elsewhere around the country that have millions of listeners, millions of followers, millions of people that they influence. Guess what? That's mainstream. A show like Geek Therapy Radio with only the reach of a few thousand or a few tens of thousands, I don't know how many people, tune in day to day. I can find those metrics, whatever. I'm just saying, I'm not on the same scale of Sean Hannity. A show like Geek Therapy Radio is actually not mainstream. It is so far off the radar of mainstream because I don't have the reach and following of a Sean Hannity, for instance. So all I'm saying is that's why I've come up with the term MSTR, mainstream talk radio, because talk radio does have hundreds of millions in reach. It's something like 140 million people a day tune into the radio. Not like they're intently listening. It's not 140 million people every single day, like sitting there and just soaking in the radio, but that's kind of how many ears they hit on a day-to-day basis. It's only 100 million. So tens of millions of people, you can safely bet, hear Sean Hannity every day. Millions of people easy hear Sean Hannity and watch Fox News every day. And they bandy about the term mainstream media. They are mainstream media. You have tens of millions, hundreds of millions of listeners and reach and influence. That's mainstream. So on my show, I go against the grain of MSTR, of mainstream talk radio, because I will talk about subjects like electric vehicles in this case objectively, not leaning towards the issue left or right. My radical opinions, my radical voice they're radical because they are objective. Because they are not, because, like AOC is not whispering in my ear. Neither is Ted Cruz whispering in the other ear. Here's what you should say about all these things. I don't give a rat's patoot about either of their opinions when it comes to my own opinions on things. So I just know that in mainstream talk radio, electric vehicles are a boogeyman. And if what you know about electric vehicles comes from the mouths of people like Sean Hannity, suffice to say, you don't know 90% of what there is to know about it. All you know are the little memes they share of like a Tesla broken down or being charged by a diesel generator. And that's what you know about EVs is, oh my gosh, here comes the internal combustion engine to save yet another EV. I had a local host, who shall remain nameless, post a little Twitter meme of a diesel tow truck or whatever towing an electric vehicle, or it was like a gas generator charging a Tesla on the side of the road. And I was like, yep, but here's also this. And it was a picture from the early 1900s of a horse and buggy towing like a Ford Model T that had broken down. It's like, yeah, the old technology. We're in this transitional space where sometimes EVs break down and it takes a gas vehicle to save them or help them out. But we were in the same position 100 years ago when you literally had horses dragging the new internal combustion engine vehicles to the mechanic. It's just a transition. We'll talk about more EVs and stuff in the next segment. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I hope what I was saying last segment made sense. And if you're just tuning in on the radio, I'll just recap, just bring you up to speed for a minute. Basically, I was saying that when we talk about, I was using EVs as an example, that when you hear the mainstream talk radio, MSTR as I dub it, mainstream talk radio, it is mainstream because it reaches tens to hundreds of millions of ears every day across the globe. That's mainstream. You hear people on Fox News, for instance, and maybe even on this radio station or other radio stations in conservative talk radio talk about the mainstream media. Well, Mr. Sean Hannity and Fox News, you are mainstream too. You have hundreds of millions, tens of millions, whatever, millions of listeners and influence. That's mainstream. So on mainstream talk radio, you will hear electric vehicles only spoken of as a boogeyman, as like something to fear, something that is terrible technology, something that's going to make, coal miners be out of a job, that's going to ruin the oil industry, all this. It's all not true. It's all completely biased nonsense. But regardless, what the information you hear about EVs from biased sources is incorrect. Same thing. I won't say entirely incorrect, but I'll say biased heavily with that you should listen to and regard with a huge grain of salt. Same thing on the left. If if you're listening to some very obviously biased liberal publication or speaker or influencer talking about EVs, that they're the second coming of Jesus and they're going to save the environment, that's not the case either. Both sides have their agendas. What makes me feel like a radical sometimes, especially on this station and in this cluster where I have the gift of free speech, the privilege of free speech, the right of free speech to say what I want to say about things, is that it sounds radical that I come from an objective place when I talk about technology, and in this case EVs specifically. That they aren't the boogeyman that the right wants you to think. They aren't the savior that the left wants you to think. It's a product. You have full choice to purchase them or not. But there's a lot of misinformation out there. Alex Jones recently. This is a ridiculous sentence to say because you hear it all the time in regards to Alex Jones. Alex Jones has recently been caught giving out more information. This time, obviously, about EVs. It was a few weeks ago. a YouTuber, Hoovie's Garage, put out a video that was admittedly kind of clickbaity and sensationalized. It had to do with the Ford F-150 Lightning's towing capability, and as Hoovie put it in some words or less, basically it was a nightmare towing experience with a Ford F-150 Lightning, that the range was was dramatically reduced. And he was basically driving slower than usual to conserve electricity, which wasn't even true. That's what Alex Jones was saying, was that he's like, look at this, you can't even drive over 20 miles an hour in an electric pickup truck. That's weak sauce. He's like, a lawnmower has more power than that or whatever. That's because Alex Jones has no friggin' idea of what he's talking about topics in general, but specifically about EVs also. No clue what he's talking about. It's all just sensational. It's not even journalism. By the way, what you're listening to on the radio, when you're listening to other hosts and you're listening to shows outside of this broadcast, or on like weekdays and rush hour and morning drives and afternoon on talk radio, that's not news. So long as we're all clear on that. That's commentary. That's taking a little grain of truth about something. That's taking a little piece, a little post-it note of a story, and extrapolating in 3 or 4 hours on the radio about a very small certain thing that gives the host probable deniability, so it can't come back and bite them in the butt about it. But the point is, you're not getting news. When you get home after listening to whoever you were listening to on your rush hour drive home on conservative talk radio, or it doesn't really exist, liberal talk radio. But if you're listening to something, on mainstream talk radio, you get home and you think you're educated on something. You think you know more about a thing. You don't. You know the host's opinion on it, and you know how the host is trying to manipulate your opinion about it and manipulate your feelings to keep you on to the ad break. That's the only goal. The goal isn't to be factual. The goal is to be emotional. The goal is to keep you sucked in, keep you angry most of the time. Is what you're listening to is going to make you angry. Next time you're listening to your mainstream talk radio host on your way home or way to work or in the middle of the day, whatever, and you find yourself boiling up, you're getting angry, and oh gosh, those freaking liberals. Like, that's the time when you're supposed to sit back and take a little reality check. Why am I getting so worked up about this? Can I at least acknowledge the fact that what I'm listening to, what I'm getting worked up about, is commentary? It's this host's opinion about this thing, or the host's guest's opinion on this thing. And by the way, I didn't know I was going to get off on this tangent, but welcome to Geek Therapy Radio. So when hosts pick guests, typically when it's a sensational show, when they have to sell ad space, when they have to get you to the ad break to hear the sponsors of the show, hear the pitches from the sponsors, the whole goal of it is to keep you emotional and attached to the show. And most of all, what that amounts to these days on mainstream talk radio and mainstream media also is making you scared, basically, or making you angry and or scared is the go-to, because you can't really use sex much anymore. Sex sells is kind of taboo in 2022. So what's left? Fear-mongering, and making you angry. That's how they get you, and it's more effective than sex sells anyways. So when they do the show prep, they're not looking for a host. Like, they're not going to University of Houston's like staff list and looking for a scientist, somebody who's a professional in the field, who has an unbiased opinion about something, who's very objective. They're not picking that person. They're not picking the objective guest, because that's boring. That's not going to boil the blood of the listeners or scare you. What they're doing is they pick guests that may or may not be experts in their field, but align with the host kind of politically and ethically, so to speak. That these guests are cherry-picked to promote a narrative. They're cherry-picked to promote a narrative. I repeat that again. They're not picked to be factual or actually give you real information that you can use that's objective. They're cherry-picked to keep you emotional, and they're cherry-picked to toe the line, to keep the narrative going, keep the commentary going in the way that is going to get you pissed off and riled up and sticking to the ad break. So one of the areas that was kind of where you listened to mainstream talk radio and you got a lot of bad information was following the ice storm of February 2021. where basically you had a bunch of radio hosts and their guests and stuff blaming, subsidies for wind energy and all sorts of things for failing the Texas grid and all that. Well, the reality is that you saw the pictures of the windmills and stuff that were frozen, the wind turbines and generators that were frozen. That was like one or two. That was a handful. The rest of them were still going. Matter of fact, the rest of them were still going, providing electricity to homes that gas had failed, that the natural gas lines had seized up, had cracked. They didn't order enough gas to begin with, but the infrastructure for the gas failed. The actual components in the lines to deliver gas to the houses to heat the homes and run the generators and things, they were broken. The valves were broken. The pipes were broken. It was all sealed shut. The reason why we had over 4 million homes without power in Texas was because at least 80% of the electricity and the power in the state comes from natural gas and comes from resources like that, fossil fuel-based resources. 4 million people, there are not 4 million houses in Texas that run off wind power in general. Wind power makes up 20 to 25% of Texas electrical grid. So it makes no mathematical sense that the wind turbines would be responsible for the power outages we experienced that winter of 2021. It just doesn't make any sense. But do you think you heard anybody mention that objective fact on mainstream talk radio? Absolutely not. Because science is boring. Reality is boring. Objective truth is boring. It's not sensational. It doesn't sell ad space. It doesn't get clicks. You're not going to hear objective opinions. That's what makes a show like mine radical. Not that I'm a show for the left, because screw the left. Not that I'm a shill for the right, because screw the right. I'm a shill for me. I make my own money. I don't make any money from this show. I make my own money. That makes me a dangerous, objective voice in a landscape meant to deceive you. We'll be right back. All right, let me get back on track a little bit here. I've soapboxed. I soapbox from time to time on the station. I don't want, real quick, welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio, by the way. I don't want you to think that I have, that I dislike, like other hosts on the station, like personally. Like I love Kenny Webster. I love Michael Berry. I love Jesse Kelly as people. We might have disagreements as far as like show content or maybe even political opinions, but as people, I love them and I consider them friends. We have differing opinions when it comes to the things that I mentioned, but here's a good thing to say about it. Here's where I want to go with this little sentiment. What a tragedy it is in this country that we've started to allow difference of opinions to determine whether or not we like somebody or whether or not that person is a good person. What a tragedy it is that someone would assume a person wearing a MAGA hat is automatically a bad person. What a tragedy. And also what a tragedy it is to see, for somebody on the other side, to see somebody, driving around in a Tesla and wearing a Greenpeace shirt to automatically assume that that person is a bad person. That has nothing to do with a MAGA hat or a Tesla has nothing to do with whether a person is a good or bad person or not. Politics has nothing to do with whether or not a person is a good or bad person individually. What a tragedy it is in this country, especially, that we're coming up to the holiday season and there are family members and friends that won't get together anymore because they basically have cut another person out of their life for political differences, for differences of opinion, that they've canceled each other, not like canceling shows or whatever, but we've canceled people out of our life because they support Trump, or we've canceled people out of our life because they support Biden or whatever. Why? Where did we get off track that our differences of opinions held so much water and held so much weight in determining whether we like a person or not? It has nothing to do with. I've got friends and family members who who are Trump supporters, for instance, and Biden supporters. And there's a difference between like Trump voters, Biden voters, and Trump supporters, and Biden supporters. There's a difference between a voter and a supporter. Somebody who voted for somebody is not the same person as somebody who's supported somebody. There's a stark difference there. But what I'm saying is I do have supporters of both sides. I have supporters of all sorts of different ideology in my friends and family. Doesn't make them good or bad people. That's not what determines whether they're good or bad people. I know horrible people that are liberals. I know despicable people that are conservatives. I know wonderful people that are atheists. I know wonderful people that are Christians. I know terrible people that are religious, and I know terrible people that are atheists. It doesn't matter. Whatever kind of badge you wear on your sleeve doesn't make you a good or bad person at all. It's just differences of opinions. And where do we get off track that we started to cut people out of our lives because their opinions were different? That's craziness to me. That's really what I wanted to say about that. There are hosts on this station that we disagree politically, and it's basically the disagreement is that I'm not, I don't have an extreme opinion the way they do, the way they need to, basically to have their platform be as successful as it is. More power to them. They can do whatever they want. I disagree with like show content and maybe some opinions. But for instance, I love the other hosts on the station. I love Kenny Webster. I love Jesse Kelly. I love Michael Berry. I consider them all friends. I've worked with them for a very long time. I helped produce their shows. I know them. They are good people. Like, they are good people. No matter how you disagree with them on the air, maybe their opinions that they say or whatever, you can think whatever you want about them. But the fact is that in real life, they're good people. That their opinions and whatever they have, their opinions on the radio, doesn't make them bad people. They can have opinions that you radically disagree with. That you like their opinion can boil your blood. That you have such a strong opposite opinion of them. But it's just that, an opinion. That's not what makes them good or bad people. And in fact, they are good people. For the most part, the people that you disagree with are good people. My goodness, I went off on a tangent, and trust me, when I put this up on YouTube and the way I label things on the podcast and things like that, you'll see the chapters in the YouTube, and you can click around and you can skip the whole diatribe that I just went into. But if you are watching this on YouTube and you do want to hear what I was just talking about for, how many, 23 minutes going on this point, you can go back to the beginning. Just love your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Love your friends and family, even if they have different political views than you. So there was a main point that I wanted to get to in this show, and this is where we're going to geek out a little bit. This is kind of where it gets a little geeky, which is great because this is Geek Therapy Radio. Last week, my wife and son and I, who is going to be, by the time this broadcast airs, he's going to be 2 years old. Riker's going to be 2 years old. I don't want to get off on such a tangent about how much I freaking love my son. But he's going to be 2 years old, and I am just a father who's ecstatic to have such a wonderful son. He's a rascal sometimes, but what 2-year-old isn't? Anyways, we went to the pumpkin patch. Where did we go? Blessington Farms? It's kind of like a fairgrounds thing. It's farmland, but they configure it in the holiday season to be kind of like a fair type situation where you have slides and pumpkins and food and all sorts of fun things to do. So on the way up there, we're cruising down. If you're from Texas, we exited Sugar Land. We're going northwest just a little bit out towards the Willis area. Went out to Orchard, Texas. It's very close to Orchard, Texas. Blessington Farms might be in Orchard, actually. But we're kind of cruising along up there. And for those of you who know me, you know the show, our daily driver, I'll preface this by saying I have the DeLorean, the Jetta, the Audi S5. All of those are internal combustion engines. I have 3 cars, the V6, the V8, and the 4-cylinder, all run on gasoline. 2 of them are manual transmissions, the way God intended, with 3 pedals, just as described in the Bible. Thou shalt have 3 pedals in a real car. I'm just kind of joking. But anyways, what the car we took to the farm was our daily driver, which is an EV. And my light just turned off here, just ran out of batteries, but I am going to roll with it. I'll probably fix it in the next segment. We were rolling up there in the EV, and my wife asked a very, very good question, a very, very geeky question. She asked, she basically asked, why don't electric vehicles all have like solar panels on them? Why don't they have solar panels like integrated to the roof and the hood and things like that, where they could kind of charge off of the sun? And I was like, that's a very good geeky question. You know what? I'm going to fix the light real quick. If you're watching the video, I apologize if the color temperature is a little bit different now. So my wife asked, why don't auto manufacturers or EV manufacturers like Tesla and Polestar and whoever else is in the EV game right now, Rivian, why don't they all have solar panels built into the car to charge the car off the sun? It's like, that's a very good question. That's a very geeky question, and that's worth a lot of pondering. The short answer kind of that I got into was basically it all comes down to physics. And there is, by the way, I want to talk more about this vehicle in a moment. The Sono Motors Sion, S-I-O-N, I believe is how you spell it. That is a vehicle that is absolutely covered in solar panels. They're integrated. They're not like big gaudy rectangular things hanging off all over the car, but in the bodywork and molded into the bodywork to go along with the lines and everything. They put solar cells where they'll go, monocrystalline solar cells wherever they would fit on the exterior of the car. So they are really the only one doing it in a way that appeals to the masses, because I think Lucid Air has is it Lucid? One of the like boutique EV manufacturers, not Tesla, does have a vehicle that they are very highly pushing the fact that it has solar panels that can generate real electricity on it, and it can actually like generate, 20, 30, 40 miles or kilometers per day of just solar range, basically. That car cost $250 million. $250,000. So I don't really count that as, I count it as a technological example, but I don't count it as something viable, because there are very few people listening to this show where a $250,000 car makes any sort of financial sense. But Sono Motors, S-O-N-O Motors, based in Europe, it does have a car that is clad with integrated solar panels. It actually looks really cool. Again, they're not these big, ugly, like rectangle cubes that you see on houses and stuff sticking off the car. It's not like that. They are weaved and molded into the body of the car, and they are put under like a protective epoxy coating, like it's part of the car. But they are doing it in a real way, and it kind of goes. It all plays into the question my wife asked: why aren't EV manufacturers putting EVs? Why aren't they building them into the car? It's like, that's a good question. And we're coming up on the end of the segment, so I want to get into that discussion here in the next segment. You're listening to Geek Therapy Radio. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Geek Therapy Radio. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. I've been on this EV tangent for a little while, but specifically a question that my wife asked on a recent short road trip to a pumpkin patch up in Orchard, Texas. Blessington Farms, specifically. She pondered, kind of rhetorically, why don't EV manufacturers put solar panels baked into the car? Like, why don't they build solar panels into the car and charge off the sun? And that got to a discussion of a number of things. At the end of the discussion, really, like the real reason they don't, just to kind of cut to the real reason why you don't see cars running around with solar panels, EVs running around with solar panels all over them, is cost. It costs money. That eats into the margins. So the reason why you don't see like Tesla doing it all the time is because Tesla's business model and all their margins are worked out very meticulously, very carefully at this point, where they can't really pivot too much like that because it costs real money. Now they're going to be spending money on R&D, now they're going to be spending money on materials, now they're going to be spending money on manufacturing, all that kind of stuff. So it's harder for an established automaker to kind of pivot to that kind of technology because the margins may just not be there for it, or it doesn't fit the business model, whatever. It's harder to it's hard to change horses midstream and go with a different technology or add a technology as monumental as that, as big as that, as kind of as impactful to the manufacturing process as that. Now, there can be startups like Sono Motors, SONO Motors, that from the beginning set out to make an electric car that's affordable. The Sono, what are they calling it? The Sion, Sion, I believe, not like Toyota Sion. That brand is dead, by the way. That Toyota brand is dead. But the Sono Sion is an EV priced around $30,000 to 30,000 euros. And right now, as of recording, the euro and the dollar are pretty darn close. But it's going to be an EV for the masses. And apparently, you can start pre-ordering them. I freaking hate that in terms to electric cars. The whole pre-ordering hype thing that Elon Musk started, because where's the Cybertruck? But anyways, it is coming to the United States. $30,000 is the target. You can be put on a waiting list. I'm thinking about the range. By the way, we'll talk about the solar panels in a second and how it ties into my wife's question. Why don't all EVs just have solar panels on them? To give you some range in the day. The car is set to come out. I don't know when. We don't have an exact date. I'm looking at the website right now, and it just says coming soon. Coming soon. Great. That might change by the time you go look at the app or the website. I'll include a link in the podcast description and obviously in the YouTube description as well. But it's an EV. It has something like almost 200 miles of range. This is the whole point of this car, specifically this Sonos Sion, is that it is a completely stripped down, not pretty, just bare bones basics EV that's affordable, that that the average family can kind of afford. So it's not fancy like a Tesla, it's not fancy like a Rivian, it doesn't have the range of a Tesla, it doesn't have the range of the Rivian. I think it's like a 47 kilowatt hour battery, if I'm not mistaken. Let me bring it up here, see if it shows me at all. The battery is 54 kilowatt hour battery pack, and that enables up to 305 kilometers of range on a single charge. So that's just like a hair under 200 miles. It's going to be under 200 miles. But the point is, again, I go back to this sentiment that the whole reason for this car's existence, the whole like pitch of this car is not that it's some sort of luxurious thing that's going to take you all over the world or whatever. It's a commuter car. It's to fit that need that I've talked about this so many times on the show, that EVs perfectly fit this use case scenario, and that you can use it easily 99% of the time of your real world kind of commuting. That most of the time you're not using your car to drive to California and back, you're using your car to drive to work and back. And that's a use case scenario that EVs fit the bill for 99.9% of use cases. And that's all this car is trying to be, this Sono Sion. It's not supposed to be this thing that tows your big giant boat, dual motor boat. It's not this thing that's going to be like hauling, 15 people inside of it. It's just a practical, cheap EV that can supplement its range with the sun, because it has these solar cells all built into all the bodywork around the car. Now, going back to my wife's pondering, because this segment is really not about this car in particular, just that this car in particular, the Sonos Sion, has integrated EVs into a car that's going to be affordable for the masses. It's not like the $250,000 car we're talking about, the EV that we're talking about a few minutes ago. But the real reason why that there aren't more EVs with solar panels, like I mentioned before, it's the end result. The end of the story is basically it costs money. The margins are low for a company like Tesla to pivot to it. But a startup like Sonos can do it because they're building their business model on this whole concept. Their prototype and their vehicle that's ready for production is built from the ground up, with the idea that it would integrate solar panels into the bodywork. That means they considered where they will need to save weight in other areas? Will they need to cost cut in other areas? How can they make this all work? The first point of this car is that it has solar panels in it so that it can charge up while it's driving, not while it's driving, because you're going to be depleting more than you charge, but while you're sitting there, while it's sitting in the car park, while you're working for 8 or 9 hours a day, just sitting there. Why couldn't it be, trickle charging while you're sitting there while it's doing nothing? So this car is built from the ground up. The whole company is built from the ground up on that concept. It is tough. The science of it, the physics of it, is that the reality is the sun and solar collection is a very dynamic science, and it is very, for lack of a better word, you're not going to have the car parked oriented in the most reliable way to most efficiently soak up the sun. That you're going to have variables like shade, you're going to have variables like clouds, which, by the way, when it's cloudy, it still charges. It's just not as much as if it's in full sunlight. There's all these variables, and there's only so much square footage on a car. So it works out to the math of how many watts can you produce per square foot. And then you get into all the variables that, every surface is going to be bent and like rounded, or not facing directly towards the sun, or not angled directly at the sun. So you're never going to be in kind of peak output mode ever. That's just the kind of the nuts and bolts of it. And it's kind of like, at the end of the day, you're not recuperating. You're not going to fully charge the car just with the sun. Now, you will take a huge dent. It is not nothing. The energy that you can put back in the battery pack just using the solar panels attached to the car is not nothing. You can recuperate. You can actually, what Sono says is you can do something like over 160 miles per week. Theoretically, in ideal conditions, you can recoup about 160 miles a week, which, if you got a short commute, it is a theoretical use case scenario that, you could never plug in your car, and it will just happen. It will always have enough to get you to work and back, and then some, just by powering off the sun. It can certainly do that depending on the use case scenario. But the car also charges normally. You can plug it into a charger. I think it charges at a rate of up to 75 kilowatts, which is not super duper fast charging, when fast charging on Teslas and things can do 150 kilowatts. The new Hyundais can do like 300 kilowatts, and it's going to go even further up from there, faster and faster charging as technology improves. But I'm just happy to see that when my wife asked the question, why isn't there a manufacturer putting solar panels on EVs? It just seems like it makes sense. I was like, well, it's hard to do. Lo and behold, a week later, I find out, maybe I'm just late to the game, that a company called Sonos is doing just that, and apparently has really decent results with it. Anyways, what a show. What a show this week. I'll remind my radio listeners and podcast listeners, I am putting this up on YouTube. It's probably not going to be super popular, but it is there if you want to, see me talking. But most importantly, you need to know that you are loved. If you don't listen to anything else I say on this freaking microphone, know that you are loved and that you are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving love, you are worthy of receiving love, and you are worthy of your own self-respect. No matter what walk of life you come from, you are deserving of your own self-respect, and you are worthy of love. Thank you so much for listening to Geek Therapy Radio, and I'll talk to you next time.